Now, when you talk about economic freedom, what are the principles of economic freedom that we're talking about? Well, I would say economic freedom comes down to 4 or 5 ideas. One is a limited central government. Second is a tax system that does not extract the fruits of workers and entrepreneurs' labors. A third principle is a rule of law, so that we know what the rules of the game are in the economy. Another is the protection of private property rights, that when you own something, you own it and the government can't take it from you. Another is light regulation, so the government can't come in and regulate all of the activities that you want to engage in as a businessman or a worker. All of those things are kind of the basic principles of the free enterprise system. By the way, I left out one of the most important one, which is that under the free enterprise system, you don't have government ownership and control of industries. In the United States, for the most part, until recently when we started bailing out banks and so on, we have allowed private industry to run the operations of government, and we've had very little government control and ownership. But we're unfortunately moving in the wrong direction. And in any case, those are the basic building blocks and principles of a free enterprise system. If you look on this chart, you see what happens. That countries that do have that system of low taxation, relatively limited levels of government spending, the free enterprise system, the ideas of private property, look at how much richer they are than people who grew up in countries that don't have that system. And the countries on the other extreme, by the way, are countries like North Korea and countries like Cuba and countries like Zimbabwe and Ethiopia that don't have a free enterprise system. And you can see by this chart that by virtue of the fact that most of us watching this video either live in the United States or won the ultimate lottery of life, which is we were born in this great country. By winning that lottery of life and being able to work and live in the United States, we have a living standard that is literally 5 to 6 times higher than people who live in countries that don't have a free enterprise system. And the point of this chart, by the way, is that what you want to achieve as a nation, what all of our politicians, not just in the United States but around the world, should be striving towards is the Milton Friedman idea that the free enterprise system will create wealth. And you want to move to the left on the chart, not to the right on the chart. And what's really scary is that the United States in the last few years has actually been moving in the wrong direction as we've moved towards socializing our healthcare system, for example. We've run up trillion-dollar deficits as we've had more regulations of industries like healthcare and energy and financial services. The United States is moving away from the principles of Milton Friedman, and unfortunately, we're moving in the direction of the more socialist economists, whether they're Karl Marx or John Maynard Keynes. Now, it's maybe not entirely surprising to you that countries that have a free enterprise system get wealthier. That's not that startling of a conclusion. But what's also interesting about this chart, and one of the virtues of libertarianism, which means limited government, is the fact that not only does the free enterprise system create more wealth, but it also creates more health. That is to say, countries that have a free enterprise system have less pollution, they have longer living standards, they have better nutrition. Almost every aspect of life is better in countries that have the free enterprise system. And one way of showing that point is that countries that have a free enterprise system and that are economically free, people who live in those countries have a 20-year longer life expectancy than people who grow up in countries, as I mentioned, like Cuba and many of the African countries and the Middle Eastern countries that don't have a free enterprise system. So the point of this is a kind of plea to our politicians: don't slay the goose that lays the golden eggs, which is free markets and free enterprise and libertarianism. Now, I want to make one last point about the importance of what is going on here and why it is so critical for every young person to be an advocate and a soldier for the ideas of Milton Friedman. And I want to show this chart because I think it is very alarming and it is very disturbing, and it is the path that we are on if we don't change course, which is our national debt. And the national debt, of course, is the result of years and years and decades of overspending. But as you can see from this chart, as we have sinned as a nation and moved away from the very principles that I've been talking about, and we have moved and been seduced by the ideas of big government as a solution to our problems. Look at what has happened to the massive increase in our national debt. As I speak here today, we are just surpassing the $16.4 trillion mark on our national debt, and that will soon eclipse 17 trillion, 18 trillion. We're borrowing at the pace of about $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion per year, and that simply cannot continue because it will bankrupt our country. It will mean that the young people who are watching this video, if you're just starting your working life, if you're in your late teens or in your early 20s, one of the great challenges you're going to face is paying off this enormous debt that our politicians have put upon us. And so this massive increase in the debt, I believe, is one of the greatest dangers to our economy, and we need every young person to start rising up and revolting against this overspending that is putting that is going to reduce your living standard. It's going to mean that you, as a young person today, more and more of your salary, of your wages, is going to go not to paying for your family, for buying health care or buying your groceries or buying a new home. It's going to be to pay off this enormous debt that our politicians have weighed upon us. I'll show you one last point, and I don't want to make this too confusing, but I want to address this issue that government spending is an appropriate thing to do to get an economy out of recession. This is the kind of heart of the idea of John Maynard Keynes, who believed that any time that an economy went into recession, as the U.S. did, for example, in the great 1930s, the Great Depression, during the period of 2008, when the U.S. economy had a great financial meltdown, the ideas of John Maynard Keynes and his disciples was the way you get out of that recession is have massive amounts of government spending, and that government spending will create a kind of avalanche of prosperity. As the government spends this money, it's going to circulate through the economy. There's this idea of a multiplier effect from government spending, which means that if the government spends $1 and that dollar gets circulated into the economy, that somehow it's going to lead to $2 or $3 of economic growth for the country. Now, that's a very eloquent idea. Unfortunately, it has never worked in the course of human history. And again, to go back to the beginning of this session, remember I said the big struggle over the last 100 years has been these competing ideas between John Maynard Keynes, who believed in the power of big government, and Milton Friedman, who believed that the free enterprise system would create the most wealth. And Milton Friedman really eviscerated these ideas of John Maynard Keynes because of all the things that Milton Friedman is famous for. Maybe his most famous declaration, and really almost all of economics comes down to this one very important insight, which is, and some of you may have heard this before from Milton Friedman, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And what Milton Friedman meant by that very eloquent insight was that if the government spends $1, the dollar has to come from somewhere. There's no tooth fairy out there giving away free money. The only way the government can spend $1, as Milton Friedman taught us, is if it takes the dollar away from someone. And so the fallacy of this Keynesian idea that we are now combating as those of us who believe in liberty and free enterprise, the fallacy of that idea is that there's this free money out there the government can spend to make us rich. And boy, it'd be a wonderful world, wouldn't it, if it were that simple, but of course it isn't. And Milton Friedman's point is, all you're doing is taking, when the government spends $1, is you're taking $1 from the businessman or the worker or the family, and there is no multiplier effect because when the government spends that $1, the government is $1 richer, but the American family and the American businesses are $1 poorer. There's no multiplier effect. Now, that's what Milton Friedman taught us. Now look at the evidence. If you look at this chart, you can see that this terrible, terrible recession that we've lived through, this is the red line, the bottom line there. What that's showing you is that this recession and this so-called recovery has been the weakest recovery from a recession we've ever had since the end of World War II. We've had 10 recessions since the end of World War II. This has been by far the weakest recovery. In fact, some people don't even believe we are in a recovery because the unemployment rate has remained so high for so long. The growth rate has been anemic. People aren't getting jobs. Incomes are falling. The average American family has lost $4,000 in income. So this has not been much of a recovery at all. And if you look at this, what it's saying is, by now, during most periods after a recession. We would have recovered all of the jobs that had been lost, and we would also have the incomes that had been lost would have been regained. And what this chart is showing you is we're not even anywhere near that today. As I speak to you at the start of 2013, we're supposedly 4 years into a recovery, and yet we're nowhere near to getting the jobs back that were lost. And why is that? I think it gets back to Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman was right. There's no such thing as a free lunch. All of this government spending, this trillions of dollars, and in the last 4 years under Barack Obama, we have borrowed $5 trillion. The only result we have from that $5 trillion is $5 trillion more debt. The economy is hardly better off today than it was the day that Barack Obama took office. And I'm not making this point to attack this president. What I'm saying is that these ideas don't work. They didn't work in Europe. They didn't work in Japan. They didn't work in the United States in the 1930s. And I guess the bottom line here is that Milton Friedman was right, that people like Adam Smith were right, that the course to a growing and prosperous economy is a system that allows everyone to enjoy the fruits of their labor and to have the maximum opportunity with minimal government involvement. If we get back to that system that people like Friedrich Hayek and Adam Smith and Milton Friedman talked about, America will know, in my mind, there's no question. If we get back to those principles, in the 21st century, America will continue to be the global economic superpower that we were in the 20th century. Thank you very much.